Just a second. Right, that's the broadcast just started. So for this month's Polyglot Talk, we've got Trisha Dunbar from Language Learners Journal. So I'll just hand you over to Trisha and she can start the session. So over to you.
Fabulous. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So I'm going to jump in with some mindfulness straight away, really. So I've been practicing mindfulness for about 20 years now. And I think I'm just going to mute turn the sound down because I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Is that better? Right. So did you all bring a book? Okay, so if you've all brought a book, what I would like you to do is open your book. It doesn't matter page you're on or anything like that. And I would really like you to read the first paragraph of this book. Okay? So if you can read the first paragraph of this book.
Yes.
I'll give you some time to do that. If you haven't brought a book, just find
the first one of the book, or the first one of the page.
Grab it and just read that paragraph. Okay. Right. So when you've read that paragraph, put the book down. And we'll begin. So during this session, what I would like you to get out of this session, and I've made some notes on here, is just a brief understanding of what mindfulness is, if you don't know what mindfulness is, and the benefits it can have to your language learning. And I would like you to be able to have some practices that you can take away from today's session and be able to use. So I'm going to start with what mindfulness isn't, which seems a little bit strange, but I've got a board to write on, and then I realised that unless I do mirror writing, you probably won't be able to read what I'm writing on there, so I'm not probably going to use it. But so what mindfulness isn't, it isn't about meditation. Some people just assume it's about sitting there with your legs crossed like this chanting. And no, it's not about meditation. It's not about getting away from any problems or worries you may have. If anything, mindfulness gives you a greater awareness. So you'll become more aware of any issues or any problems. But that's great when you're learning a language, because if you're aware of the areas you're struggling on, then you can actively do something about it. So mindfulness isn't all about getting into the zone. It's not about being a Buddha. The mindfulness that we're looking at today is about focusing on the here and now. So let's talk about what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is about being fully present in the here and now. Quite often we time travel. And when I say we're time traveling, I don't mean in Back to the Future type sense. I mean, in our head, we're thinking about the past or we're thinking about the future. In relation to language learning, this could be we're thinking about negative experiences that we've had when learning a language, or we're just worrying. We're worrying that we're not going to get things right. If we're learners, of course, we're not always going to get things right. That's the beauty and fun of language learning. I remember when I was learning Spanish, I kept getting my anos wrong. And my tutor pointed out I was actually saying arse instead of years. So it can be funny if you get things wrong. But in our heads, we're time traveling between these experiences of good and bad, past and present. What mindfulness does is it gets you fully focused in the here and now. So when you're fully focused in the here and now, you're taking in more information. So earlier, you read a paragraph of your book or of any reading material near you. I want to know, and I don't know if we can unmute people for this, but I want you to know what you remember from your book. So do you remember any paragraphs?
So for me, this one's probably quite easy in that it's one of my favourite books. So.
Memorised it.
So I know it quite well. So it was actually the first novel that I bought, or full-length book. So I've read it a lot of times. I could probably tell you most of it word for word. So yeah.
What about anybody else's experiences?
Yeah, probably better going with somebody else.
Anybody else? What did you remember of what you've just read? Or did you not have any reading materials? No? Okay. So I'll just jump straight back into what I was doing and press mute so we don't get the echo. So a lot of the times we read a book, and the problem we have when we read a book is basically we don't remember that page that we've just read. And the reason we don't remember that page we've just read is because we're in here again. We're time traveling. We may be thinking about the past or the future. We could be thinking about what we're going to have for dinner, but we weren't absorbing what's in front of us. Now, when we learn a language, if we are using books or even audio, it's so easy for our attention to just wander off. And to train your attention is about bringing it back to what you're doing in the here and now. And that's being mindful. Being mindful is using all of your senses to engage in your language learning materials. I don't mean licking your books or things like that, but I think using all of your senses to learn a language and really put that input into your brain is really, really important. But by doing one thing at a time as well. So let's sort of look into this a little bit deeper. So when you're reading a book, when you're doing your vocabulary, really focus on doing your vocabulary. But when you focus on doing your vocabulary, if you get any thoughts, enter. So it could be like, this is hard, I can't do this. Accept those thoughts, but allow them to pass. Don't focus on those thoughts, because we tend to do that. We tend to start to focus on what we're thinking about, and before we know it, we're not really fully engaged with the materials that we should be fully engaged in. So I've got another little activity for you to do now. I don't know if you've got a pen or a paper available, but if you've got a pen and paper available, I want you to write your name. Now, this sounds easy, but I can see what's pen and paper there. Great. I want you to write your name, but with the hand you don't normally use. Okay, so write your full name, but in the opposite hand to what you normally use. So if you're right-handed, use your left-handed, use your left hand. But so if you could do that now. And there's always a purpose, always a reason why I say to do these activities, even if they do seem rather odd and unlanguage related. Okay, so we've all written our names with the hand we don't normally write with. I'm going to turn the sound back on because I want to know how that was for you when you were writing your name. So how was that for you, writing your name?
Strange and difficult.
Yep. Anyone else?
Yeah, hard, difficult.
Yeah. Unnatural.
Illegible.
So I'm just going to pause. Just going to mute my speakers here so I can. Okay, so the reason for doing that is when we write with a hand we don't normally write with, we want to go back to the old way of doing things. So we want to write with our right hand, or if we're right hand, we might want to write with our left hand. But it's strange, it's difficult, and it feels odd. Isn't that just what it's like when we first learn a language? It's strange, it feels odd. We want to go back to the old way of doing things, so we want to go back to our native language rather than go back because it's what we're used to. So learning languages, being mindful, it's just like writing with the opposite hand. But with practice, what happens if you were to keep, every day write with your other hand? What would happen over time?
Get used to it.
You'd get better. You would get faster at doing it, better and faster. It would feel more comfortable to you. It will feel more native to you. So over time, it becomes
natural.
Yeah, it becomes natural. So so that was a bit of a strange task to do, but it was to show you that over time it gets easier. And when you first start applying mindfulness, it feels a bit strange and unnatural, and you're more likely to sort of give up. But over time, it becomes the new go-to method. And same with learning languages. All right. So always go back to sort of, if you start to lose your way of learning languages, I always say get a pen and paper and write with the hand you don't normally write with to remind you why it feels strange. Okay. So yeah, going back to using all of your senses. So when I first started learning languages again, I really engaged with the materials. But I didn't just engage with the materials. I did one thing at a time for 20 minutes. So if I wanted to study vocabulary, I would study vocabulary, and I would study vocabulary for 20 minutes. If I had any thoughts going on in my head or any distractions, I would try to bring my focus of attention back to the vocabulary. If I was doing audio, I would listen for 20 minutes. Set an alarm if I have to, because it's difficult. When you're really fully focused and you're really in the zone, you could go on for a lot longer. But for 20 minutes. But then I would take a short break, and that's really, really important. When we're language learning, sometimes we could really get into the zone, and before we know it, hours and hours have passed. And that starts to be unproductive, because our brains can really only take in information for about 45 minutes, although it depends on the individual. So if you take a short break, it's allowing your brain to just sort of just digest what you've just done. Now, this break could be for 10 minutes, but try to do absolutely nothing. And that's difficult. That's hard to do absolutely nothing. But you want to sort of just pull back and really let your brain digest what you've just done. So it's really, really important to do that. It's really mindful to do that. And also, you're not going to burn out from language learning if you take regular breaks. They're so, so important. So after that 10-minute break, go back, do another 20 minutes of language learning or 25 minutes of language learning. It may be that you want to focus on different areas. So it may be speaking, for example, for the next 20 minutes. Speaking. So when you're speaking a language, you are naturally being quite mindful, because when you're first starting to learn, you're using visual, because you're watching the mouth movements of the person that's talking. So you're using visualization to look at that. Obviously, you're listening to what they're saying. At least I hope you're listening to what they're saying. Now, as language learners, we have a real urge to think how we're going to reply to people. We have this urge. But if you're learning mindfully, you need to be listening. So listening without thinking about replying. Yes, you are going to reply, but it's listening to how the words are being said, listening to the accent, even the tone, especially if it's a tonal language you're listening to. So that's really, really important. So it's pulling back, listening to that person, and then replying. And it's okay to take a breath before replying as well. When you're taking those deeper breaths, you're giving more oxygen to your brain. So you're feeding your brain, but also you're taking that time to really think about what you're going to say next. You're not just rushing into the conversation. So that's really, really important when you're learning a language. So it may mean that when you're chatting away, it could take longer because it's not so hurried, the conversation, but you'll get quite a lot out of it. Because what will happen is if you're talking to that person, they really feel that you're listening to them, they're going to be more engaged with what you have to say as well. So it is quite a wonderful way to go around it. So taste, you're probably thinking, if I'm saying to you, use all of your senses in language learning, how are you going to use taste? That's simple. That's eating some of the foods from the language that you're learning. And whilst you're eating those foods, reminding yourself of what these foods are. It could be that you stick sticky notes on these on the food that you're eating, on the packets and things like that. But yeah, bring foods into language learning. The smells of the foods is really, really important. Really engage all of your senses with the language. Fully absorb yourself in the language. When you're watching movies, again, watch movies really mindfully. Really listen to what they're saying. Watch how the face is reacting to the language. That's really, really important. So with some of the things that we've discussed so far, has anyone got any questions? Let me just turn my sound back on. Is there any questions so far?
So you mentioned about when listening, like getting distracted and things like that. One of the common things with me when I'm listening is I'm listening to text, I hit a word that I'm not entirely sure of, and then my brain goes off and starts trying to figure out that word. And then before I know it, another 30 seconds of listening's passed, and I've completely missed everything that's gone on. So you've said try to be mindful and bring yourself back, but what would you do to do that? Is it just a case of trying to ignore that, or?
It's practice. You know the saying that practice makes perfect. First of all, it's developing awareness. So you've already got that. You know that you're doing that. So if you're aware of something, you can change it. So it's a case of every time you do that, actually stop yourself. Not necessarily ignore it. It's a kind of bit like let it go. Think of the Disney song, let it go. Because you can return to that word afterwards. Okay, so you can do 20 minutes on vocab, just focus on the vocab, or listening, or whatever you're doing, and then pause it, have that 10-minute break. Then after the 10-minute break, anything that you didn't quite understand, go back to that, I would recommend. But don't go back to it in amongst your planned study. Always have a goal in mind when you're studying, even if it's just for 20 minutes, have a reason for doing it. So just learning vocabulary isn't a reason. Your reason could be, during this 20-minute session, I'm going to learn how to order coffee and make it that mission, make it your goal. And if your mind wanders from that goal, bring it back to that goal. But it does take practice. It does take time to do. But yeah, it's possible. And sometimes it does take the breathing techniques. So just taking a breath, first of all, to bring yourself back. Do you have any other questions? Any other questions from anybody? any questions about what we've done so far?
This isn't really a question, but it's more just a statement about when you said about speaking, the fact that we tend to focus on what we are going to say next. That's definitely a common problem for me, and pretty much every conversation I have ends up being more like an interview, in that because I'm so focused on the question that's going to come, I completely miss everything else that's happening. Wait for the question, then I give my answer, and I'm so focused on the answer, I've not actually thought about it being a conversation. So I don't ask a question back. I then just wait for the next question, and it's just a big ball of panic, really.
And that's why mindfulness is so important in language learning, because you'll get more out of it if you're listening to them. I can't even say pronunciation. Your pronunciation will get better because you're listening to how they are saying it. It's very, very important, especially in tonal language. As you're all aware, I'm learning Chinese, and if I get the slightest tone wrong, I could be saying a different word. So I could be saying that my mother's a horse, for example, just by getting a tone wrong. So learning Chinese, it really forces you to be very mindful because you're listening out for the tones. In languages, there's a lot of tones that aren't used. Say, for example, in English, we've got that R, isn't it, in Spanish? And you really have to listen to that. And you really have to look as well to see how they're producing that sound, because it isn't a sound that we've got in English. So it's really, really important just to really listen and not to be scared about not being able to answer. Because if you've learned how to say, I don't understand, which in Chinese it would be 我不懂, you can say that. But it's when you first start learning, I think it's being able to understand what's being said and then focus on being able to answer, but really having that good understanding is very important. So any other questions about how you could apply some of this to your languages?
So we saying about 20 minutes take a break or 25 minutes take a break. Would you then recommend that where most sites are like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour for lessons, that it's probably better to stick to 30-minute lessons?
I always do 30-minute lessons, but what I sometimes do is I book a 30-minute lesson and then I will take some time out, but then I'll book another 30-minute lesson, and I'm pretty sure the iTalk teachers think, oh no, not her again. Why doesn't she just book for an hour? But I do it. So we do the first half an hour, and then I take a break and I'll go have a coffee and I'll go and reflect upon what we've just done. Then I'll go back into it, and I find that much more effective than if I was just to do a full hour. If I do a full hour, I don't know about yourself or anybody listening, I get so tired. I really do. I feel like, just towards the end of the conversation, I'm going to fall asleep, and it's awfully rude. But I just feel so tired. But by breaking it up to 30 minutes, break 30 minutes, it energizes me because I've had that time to think about what the first half was said. And then when I go back, it's really weird. I'm able to engage much more with the conversation. So I'd really recommend doing that. I think not all teachers have that availability. So some only book for 45 minutes or an hour. So it's not always possible. But if it is possible, I would recommend that. Or 45-minute sessions.
Okay, that's really interesting. I'm a language learner, but also a teacher of English. And that's really interesting to hear that. And I'm thinking, okay, so maybe I need to make shorter lessons available and to say, maybe it's an hour lesson, but we have half an hour.
Or even a 10-minute break,
a 15-minute break, and then we have another half an hour. I'm thinking as a teacher now, not as a learner, but I'm thinking, yes, that's something to think about, that maybe that's a good way to allow for that and to give them things to, go away and think about this and come back in 15 minutes and we'll carry on.
And it would be really interesting if you were to record how the students progress doing that as well.
Yeah.
I teach too, and when I'm teaching, even when I'm teaching mindfulness, I always have a 10-minute break in between the sessions, so students just get that little bit of a breather, so they can just relax and just process the brain can process what they've just done before moving on to the next bit. So, and students tend to take away a lot more from doing that.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's just I never thought about doing it in an actual structured lesson online. I'd never thought about that. It's really useful.
Yeah, and see, because everyone learns differently. So see what students think about that. But I would certainly recommend having a short break in between. I'm suggesting 10, but it could only be 5 minutes. It's what works best for your students. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, you said about when you're trying to learn something and your mind wanders off.
Yes.
And I have that problem at the moment, that I'm learning Italian, as Darian knows, and I'm a beginner in Italian, and I'm finding it really hard. I suppose it's about motivation, really. But I'm finding it very hard to stay motivated. That I'm trying to, I'm doing my 30 minutes now, and then I'm thinking, oh no, what are the kids going to have for tea, or just basic life things that happen, and I find it very hard. And I think my motivation is less than when I learn other languages, and so I just find it very hard to keep that focus and to bring myself back. And I focus on listening, and I'm listening to something, but then my mind, at the end of the audio, I think my mind wasn't absorbing it. I'm thinking about, oh, well, I need to go and buy some like fish fingers. I need to buy some chicken. I need to buy, and I'm thinking about life and not about, because I'm learning Italian as my need is not so great in that I'm learning it to be a tourist, whereas my kids at home need food and need to be, that's a higher priority need. Yeah. And so it's hard to keep the focus.
Okay. Are your children learning Italian as well? Would they be interested in learning?
Well, no, that is really interesting, because with my other languages, French and Spanish, I've always involved the children in that.
Okay.
But I haven't with Italian. And so, yeah, that's actually interesting, because when I've involved them, it has been easier. But what you said about food has really resonated with me, because in the past, when my children were younger and I did French and Spanish, we always had a Wednesday night in our house has always been a languages night, and I'd cook a French meal or a Spanish meal, and we'd learn through the food. So maybe I need to do that for Italian. It's made me think that's...
You're answering your own questions there, aren't you?
Yeah. But I wouldn't have done, apart from this session, it wouldn't have occurred to me. So thank you. Yes.
You're very welcome. I would suggest maybe 20 minutes at the moment, before going straight into 30, build it up gradually. So if you're struggling with 30, do 20. Italian, there's lots of great foods with Italian food. So engage the children by talking in Italian about the food, get Italian food in. Maybe that will help, especially if you're going there as a tourist. Food's going to be really high on the agenda. So so make food your topic of the month, maybe.
Yeah, no, it really resonated when you said about food and the taste, and that is how I have done things in the past. But because both my children already have a primary second language, I haven't really introduced Italian as another language. So yeah, but no, food I think is great as a way in. Thank you.
It's always the way in with food. Fabulous. So is there any other questions that have come up from what you've done so far?
So you also mentioned about your lessons. So with most of the teachers I've taken lessons with, their lessons are structured to an hour. It's all about getting through a set amount of material in the hour and then leaving you for so many days to then practice that and absorb it. And your next lesson's on a completely new topic, which I always find quite infuriating anyway. But do you have conversations with your teachers up front about slowing it down and doing it a different way? And what kind of things would you say in that conversation to structure it well enough to work for you?
I do. I always make sure that we have a session which isn't anything to do with language learning, which is about how I learn, and mindful way of learning. So I maybe I'm a bit of a diva when it comes to I'm probably going to get banned from iTalk, aren't I? I could be a bit of a diva. So what I do is I say to them, first of all, that half an hour sessions, and I've been lucky for Chinese, there's been a lot of teachers offering half an hour sessions, so I take them. If half an hour isn't available, for Spanish it wasn't available, so I took 45 minutes. But I will say to the tutors, I need a bit of a break in between, even if it's just to run and get a quick drink and come back. But as long as you're saying that up front and you're setting boundaries with them. I always ask for a recap for the first 15 minutes. So if I normally do Tuesdays and Thursdays with the tutor. So on a Tuesday, we learn new vocabulary. On the Thursday, the first 15 minutes is just going back over what we'd covered before. I always ask them to set me homework as well, and keep me structured, and I tell them to tell me off if I haven't done my homework, because I know it's important. I'm not going to learn if I'm not doing anything. But I always get them to pause in between different sections as well, just to give my brain, just to take a breath and give my brain time to catch up. And so far, the tutors have found this really, really interesting, and they've applied it to other students. So they like what I've almost been teaching the tutor. They like what I've said, and they've been applying it, and they found that other students are progressing with their languages because it's not all just blah, 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 you know, or structured, rushed lesson with lots to cover. They're taking a step back, allowing students' brains to just process the information. Another interesting thing is I like to do my tutorials later on in the evening if I can, because sleep is brilliant for memory. When we sleep, our brain's cleaning itself and doing all this fancy stuff that we're not even aware of. Our brain is its most active when we're actually asleep. So learning later can be more beneficial in language learning for the brain, because your brain's going to clean itself. When it comes to languages, your brain, the way it works is if you don't use it enough, it's like, this is garbage, we don't need this, let's get rid of this. So it is so important to keep going over materials until your brain thinks, oh, this is kind of important, maybe I should be remembering this, because it will happen. Eventually it will happen. And then when you get to that stage, even if you haven't studied that material in a little while, it doesn't take long for the brain to be able to remember it again, and you don't lose that completely. So going over material is so, so important. Taking breaks, allowing your brain to catch up, so, so important. Getting enough sleep when you're learning languages is actually really, really important, because you want your brain to be working at its best. So yeah, and eating the right foods. So that can go back to mindfulness, because you can eat very mindfully and slow yourself down when you're eating. But if you're not dehydrated, you know, if you're dehydrated, and how are you going to remember stuff? If you're hungry, your brain's going to be focused on food. It's going to be focused on that need. So it's not going to care that you're learning these words, and it probably won't remember these words because your brain's just food, food, food. So the whole sort of holistic well-being approach is really, really important when you're learning a language, because you're not going to learn efficiently if you're hungry, if you're thirsty, if you're sleep deprived, if you're just rushing into the language with too many tabs opened, and you know, you've got 10 language books over there, you've got someone speaking to you over here, and you know, if you're doing too much, you're just going to overwhelm your brain. So that's why I say one thing at a time, taking it slowly, taking a step back. So any questions?
If my brain is active in the evening, I can't sleep.
I know, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because sometimes after you've learned a language, it's all going around in the brain. So evening time might be the best time. Yeah. Yeah, so not too late. It's about what works for you as well, and your tutor, because sometimes you might only be able to get really well different times on for your tutor. For example, when I first started learning Chinese, I could only get 5 o'clock on a Saturday or Sunday appointment for this. She was a fabulous teacher. I didn't want to lose her, but yeah, that was a bit much. 5 a.m. on a Sunday learning Chinese. But then I found a new tutor that could do the evenings. So yeah. Okay. So any other questions?
So anybody that knows me knows that I take on way too much. Go at 100 miles an hour. You mentioned about eating mindfully. I inhale food, and I never get enough sleep. I'm powered by caffeine. So I know that you work with clients quite a lot. If you've got someone that is so really exceptionally busy, what suggestions do you give to them to be able to carve out time to be mindful and do something focused?
So if you're really, really busy, that's when you need mindfulness the most, because being busy doesn't always equal productivity. And if you're very busy, you can make mistakes. You're actually more likely to make mistakes if you're really busy, especially if there's so much going on in your head. So it is literally taking a step back. It's taking those breaths, making sure that you're taking real deep breaths. So if you put your hands on your stomach, and I mean, you can all try this now. If you put your hands on the stomach, if your fingers slightly part, you're taking that deeper breath. If you're breathing from the top of your chest, so maybe have a think now, where are you breathing from? Are you breathing from the top of your chest, or are you getting those deeper belly breaths? if you're breathing from the top of your chest, then you're not breathing correctly, and your brain's really not getting as much oxygen as it could be. Your lungs won't be as efficient either, because you're not getting all that, this sounds gross, but all that gunk at the bottom of your lungs. You know, you're not giving your lungs that workout. If you notice how babies breathe correctly. As we get older, we kind of forget how to breathe. I know we're all breathing because we're all here, but we don't breathe correctly. And when you don't breathe correctly, your brain isn't getting that oxygen. If your brain's not getting that oxygen, you're more likely to feel a bit confused, a bit dazed. But also, if you start breathing correctly and you haven't done so in a while, it can make you feel a bit dizzy and a bit funny. And then some people give up breathing deeply because they think, oh, it didn't work for me. It made me feel a bit giddy, a bit funny. But that's because you're just not used to it. So it's really important to get those deeper breaths. But it's also important because it makes you take a step back as well. So you're not rushing into the next task. For example, if you're going to be jumping around learning languages at 100 miles an hour, Gary, remember to take a breath, okay? Take a breath, take a step back, review the material before moving on to new material, and then take breaks in between studying. So break it down, 20 minutes, have that focus, have that goal of what you want to do in that 20 minutes and achieve. Once you've achieved that, tick it off, take that break, but then review it. And then once you've reviewed it, then move on to something new. So you're doing it gradually in manageable chunks. What meaningful? It's meaningful, manageable chunks. Do you think that will work?
Maybe. I'll try it. I'll definitely try it. I'm quite lucky in that I've always had a knack that when I'm working on something, I can focus to the exclusion of everything else. As in anything short of a nuclear bomb going off next to me and I won't notice. People used to pick up on it quite a lot because my kids would be standing next to me going, Dad, 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 and I would be completely oblivious because I was so focused. But for some strange reason, it doesn't seem to work with language on it.
Right.
Not to that degree. When I'm programming or something like that, I do it automatically. Sometimes when I'm watching TV, I'm completely unaware of everything else that's going on. But when I'm trying to learn a language, I think I'm just so self-conscious that it doesn't seem to work.
Set a goal, for that 20-minute session, you need a meaningful why you're doing that. So make it meaningful to you. And that might help. Maybe do something around your interests. So do something around programming, or around something that you really, really like, just to see if that works. And then let me know, if any of you are putting these practices into practice, do let me know how you get on, or any challenges you face, because you won't find out the challenges you face until you've been doing it for a little while. But my main sort of, I suppose, takeaways for today, and I'm not meaning pizza or Chinese, my main takeaways are to actually take a step back, which doesn't sound productive, does it, for language learning? But take a step back, take breaks, have a meaningful why, always a meaningful why, but do one thing at a time. So if you're going to learn new words, learn new words. If you're going to watch a movie, watch that movie. Use all of your senses, really engage. When you start to wander off in that time traveling mode again, bring yourself back, because you're all aware of when you do it. So just bring yourself back and think, no, this is my goal. I'm working on this now. It takes time, but it will start to improve your focus, but it's not going to happen overnight. Because if you think about the habits that you've fallen into, you've been doing that way of things for a long, long time. It goes back to the left, right hand, doesn't it? You always fall back to what you feel most comfortable doing. Learning a new language, none of us feel comfortable when we're learning a new language. I don't feel comfortable when I'm trying to speak in Chinese. It's still uncomfortable for me because it's not my native language. But with practice, it gets easier. All right. So I'm going to set homework. Can I set homework?
Mm-hmm.
So with your book or any reading material, I want you to practice mindfulness to this. So next time you have a book, it doesn't have to be a language because you're just sort of starting out, you're just practicing. So open your book, not the book that you've memorized, Gary, a book that you've never seen before in your whole life, and read through the paragraph, but do it mindfully. So take a breath before you read it, read with purpose. So say to yourself, I'm going to actually remember what I've just written here. I'm not going to close the book and think, what the heck was that all about? So read with purpose. When you find your mind wandering, bring it back to the words on the page. If it helps, use your finger underneath when you read, because that's a sort of, you're using more of your senses there with it. And then when you've closed the book, review what you've just learned. Then when you sort of start to practice that, start to use it with your language learning materials, start to really engage all of your senses. So that's my homework for you, is just to start practicing. But start practicing with any book. And it could be actually a book in the language that you're learning. How does that sound? Happy with that homework?
Yeah. That sounds like a good idea for me, try to read in foreign language anyway, because I'm very guilty of just reading something and moving on, and then it's pretty much forgotten. So even just trying to summarize afterwards is probably a big thing for me.
And don't try to read the whole book. If it's in another language, just say to yourself, I'm going to read a page, or I'm going to read 3 pages. Maybe the more fluent you get, build up the number of pages that you do. But when you're first starting out, just maybe a page, 3 pages, break it down, take a break, then review what you've just done. Okay. I'm not going to mark homework in red pen. You're all fine. But do let me know how you get on. Please let me know how you get on. Okay, in the community. Fabulous. Thank you so much for having me this evening on here.
Well, thank you for joining us and for agreeing to do it. It's very, very much appreciated.
Okay. I was just going to ask everybody what one takeaway they're going to do from today's chat or talk. So one takeaway.
Just one.
Yeah. Just one. That's not homework either.
No, so for me, I think it is just about being more focused, and actually paying attention to what I'm doing. And from that, I'm not sure if I'm going into a second thing now, but actually dividing things up, so focusing on the one thing rather than just saying, right, I'm focusing on Spanish. I would actually focus on reading and maybe a specific topic for that reading as well, rather than try to take on too much.
Fabulous. And I will catch up with you. I will ask if you're doing this. You can guarantee it. Anybody else? So what would be your takeaway?
I think I will pay my attention to study only 20 minutes and take a break. It's happened to me. I'm just rushing. I listen to lesson and listen, and next day, next lesson. I have to take stop and review. It's a good idea. It's nothing new, but you remember it somehow. When you're learning, you're just rushing. So it's for me. I will learn all and fast. It's not a good idea.
No, it's not productive.
I have to stop, I will take it away.
Brilliant, thank you.
Oops.
Okay. So other takeaways? Anybody else still on with any other takeaways? Or we lost the other listeners?
So I think it's only Nikki that's left now as well.
Yeah, I missed half of it because hung up.
Yeah, you can watch it back later, Nikki,
irritated.
and take something from it there.
What?
You can watch it back on YouTube after we're done as well,
Yeah,
so it's there.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, so that'll let you figure something out from there.
Yeah, and just write any comments below when you're on YouTube. If there are any takeaways that you're going to get from this, just write them down. I can get back to you on that.
Yeah.
But thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for doing it. It really is
Thanks.
appreciated. So one other thing that I says I would do here as well, sorry, I'm now taking over, as I do, is I did say I would announce the winner of the previous challenge as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I'm doing it a little bit different from a lot of other challenges because I think that, or for me, I don't like the way that some of the challenges, it seems to be the people that are most vocal that then end up winning just because they're best known. So the way I'm doing it is pretty much anyone that finishes qualifies and goes into a draw. So I'll do the draw live. I've got a little app on my phone. I don't know if that's showing up very well. Yep. So maybe turn it that way. Is that shown back to front for you guys or the right way around? Does the name show the correct way around on
No,
there?
that's
or back
right.
to front?
Yes.
All right. On my screen, it's shown back to front, so I'm confused. Right. So for finishers, we had Sabrina, Miriam, and Dela. Oh, is that right? Okay. So let's. So what I'll do is I'll just press a button, and it just does the draw there for me. So it's completely random. And is that name showing up? There we go. So it's Miriam. There we go. So so for this challenge, we basically did $100 in italki vouchers. So I'll get those to Miriam. So that's it. That's me done.
Wow. That's great.
Okay. So Miriam had said that she couldn't join tonight. So I'll send Miriam and the other finishers a message after this as well.
Yeah.
So I'll stop the broadcast now. We can stay on and chat for a little bit more if you want. It's entirely up to you. But okay, so that's us done.